All right, I think we can start now. Hi everyone, my name is Abdul Ghaffar and I'll be your host for the afternoon. We have three very special guests with us today. Obviously Shravan. So Shravan is a principal product manager at Byju's, India's biggest edtech platform, amassing over 80 million users. He's also an educator and runs his YouTube channel and his course focused around everything product management and a very popular content creator on LinkedIn. We also have Arthur joining us. So Arthur is the Director of Marketing and Product Management at VFairs, a virtual events startup, one of the biggest breakthroughs in SaaS in the last couple of years. And lastly, we have Hassan Khan. Hassan's a software engineer at Google. Prior to that, he was working in Amazon and Microsoft. So basically 3 out of the 5 FANG companies done. And I'm sure the next two are on his list. One thing that's common in all three of our guests here today is that all of them are very popular content creators, especially on LinkedIn, where they write about product and technology and everything in between. And that's the topic of discussion today, right? Basically getting to understand the motivation and thought process behind content creation from these incredible individuals who've been able to get their word across over these past few years. So hi guys, welcome everyone.
It's a pleasure. Let me go
Abdul.
first. Yeah.
Shravan, yes, go ahead.
Yeah. First of all, it's such an honor to be talking to actually Atir Bhai, and I've been meeting Hassan for the first time. So Hassan, it's really glad to meet you first of all. So thank you very much for calling me across, and looking forward for an amazing conversation. Thanks a lot.
Yeah. Likewise. One of the great things is that we have three individuals who are just natural conversationalists. So I'm just going to take the back seat and just going to pass the buck around. And also because I'm a bit sick. So my voice sounds grainy, so I'll just sort of take the back seat today. So I'll start with I'll ask all three of you guys this question, and I'll start with a very basic yet fundamental question. That I'm assuming most of our audience would be very interested in learning, and that's to understand your motivation to start out as a content creator on LinkedIn, right? When you started out, did you see it as this vehicle of creating a personal brand or a certain means to an end, or just basically a medium to share your learnings, insights, and musings, right? And now you've just become this kind of, a sort of a thought leader in that space. So I'll start with you, Arthur.
Sure. Yeah, so I think I didn't have a deliberate idea or objective in mind at that time when I started. So basically, I started consistently writing back in 2018. And honestly, it was really a hobby at that time. I found writing as a cathartic experience, something that it was an outlet for me. And I started journaling, my thoughts and my learnings very naturally. And I used to write on Quora first, but then, the Quora became very limiting in the sense that I had to find questions where I could, sort of share my experiences. LinkedIn, it was just me and a canvas and just sharing it out. And at that time, I didn't even have a following as such. So I just kept on churning out content. So there was no idea of creating a personal brand or thinking about, can I fill a void or anything. But over time, I still remember it was when I got into a lift in Alpha Technology Park. I was going back to my office and somebody actually reached out and he said that, are you the guy who writes those posts? And I said, yeah, I do sometimes, but do you actually read it? And he said, yeah, everybody reads it in our office. And I was like, wow, I had no idea that I had that kind of an impact. And that's when I sort of basically understood that, there is a need for that. However, till date, I think it's primarily the reason why I write is because of, it fulfills me more than anything else. I know it's a very selfish explanation, but it was primarily that, I have my own stresses at work and whatnot, but writing is a way that I can just basically create that outlet. If I'm not writing it for myself, I'll burn out very quickly and I won't be able to be, that consistent either. Now sort of after, amassing followers and having interactions and with the community engagement, I think the goal has shifted a bit to become, try to answer some of the most asked questions out there in product management, help product managers, upskill themselves. But at the same time, keeping my individuality intact, keeping, making sure that, I'm writing for myself as well. And, it's something that I, associate myself with and enjoy. And then as a byproduct of that exercise, it helped me get in touch with people, network with co-founders, work with the product advisory setups and whatnot. So yeah, basic motivation, primarily inwards, and people who get a window into my conversations, they benefit. That's just a byproduct of that.
Yeah, very interesting. And you touched a point that I'll get to a bit later in our conversation, and that's around expectations that, when you do end up becoming popular, that there is just expectations of constantly churning out content, and not just that, there is also a certain expectation that you'll produce a certain kind of content, and maybe that is a bit limiting, but we'll get to that towards the end of the conversation or the later half of the conversation. But I'll now pass it to Shravan and then to Hassan to basically also understand to understand their motivation behind starting this entire process.
Sure, Abdul. Abdul, the whole point for me was very interesting. Malab, it's very serendipitous that I started writing content because I always used to write content, but it was more personal to me. It was more like I used to write shairi for myself or write stories for myself. That was completely up to me to make myself feel happy and more creative around things. But with time, what happened was when I stayed like 4 or 5 years in product management, I realized to a certain extent that people really want to know about this field because it was more like a thinking field. That's one. And there was a lot of misconception about it, that how people perceive this field in general, right? So one of the things that I took away was that going back to the concept of collective conscience, which I duly believed in from the very early on, that was fundamentally that if you really help somebody out of true gratitude in heart, that specifically that there is no expectation out of it, and that was the core thought behind it, that can there be an outlet where I can write and the expectation is that people can benefit from it. That's it. There was no other core motivation around it, and I started writing. But what happened over time was that once I started writing, I looked at nuances of things, that what make people tick, what makes it relatable, what makes them happy specifically, and what also can derive value for them. So slowly and steadily, I moved away from this context of just writing about stale product management to probably move towards a context of being slightly more humorous, because everybody wants to laugh, right? That's a natural way. It's like happiness, joy spreads by kind of sharing, right? That's how it happens. And slowly and steadily, it started happening that way. And I saw that it started transforming lives, which honestly speaking, I had no role to play it into, but maybe I just put across some sort of content which kind of motivated people to do better in life. And that gave me even more kind of that resilience and that attitude to write even more content and churn out even more content. Rather than amassing followers, it was more like the content that I used to get, that somebody used to reach out to me and say that, sir, आपकी वजह से सर ये चीज हो गई, या फिर thank you very much for giving out this content, it really helped me improve as a thinker. And simultaneously, if I look at it in a very introspective way, it also led to all of the things that Atir bhai said, that it created followers as a structure, it created advisory boards, it created opportunities. But honestly speaking, at the starting of it, it was never the intent. The intent was very, very simple, that I have a certain piece of information. Can I give it across to other people, and can other people benefit out of it? That was just, and humor just being a byproduct of my personality, it naturally came across. Yeah. So I think that was the whole thought. And then everything just came out as a network effect. Yeah.
And it also just makes your content so much more accessible, right? Just by engaging with daily humor, people that would have not otherwise thought of it as a bland topic. I mean, I'm not like people don't think about product management as a bland topic anymore. But it just kind of made the content so much more accessible to a much wider audience, right? Not just in India, but now in Pakistan, and more accessible to the South Asian region. And so yeah, so that's very interesting to know. And now, Hassan, I'll also ask you the same question, so that we've kindly closed the loop. So.
For me, it's similar to what Adibhai said. It has been an outlet for me. I have been writing in various places before, and I've been on LinkedIn for a long time, and I only recently started getting some attention. I was posting on and off previously. I started posting more frequently just in the last, I think, couple of years. And it's just a way for me to share my thoughts. I'm generally a quiet person. People who know me personally, I don't speak much, and so all the thoughts that I that go through my mind, this is one of the way to let the outside world know what's going on inside. So I think that's pretty much it. It's just a way for me to express my thoughts and opinions. And after having received some attention, I've also shared things that I've thought are going to be helpful for people who are either in the same career or would just generally benefit from being a professional, regardless if they're a software engineer or not.
Yeah, I'll just follow that up with another kind of question, and that's basically, Hassan, that we know that when you talk about creating content, there are certain individualities, right? Idiosyncrasies about each one of you, right? That Shravan talked about how in humor, where he is generally just a humorous person, and he integrates that as a part of his storytelling. And I've come across some of your content where you connect your everyday life musings and philosophical learnings to software engineering and just content on large, right? I just wanted to understand that whether that was something that was there from the start, or was it something that you started exploring and getting better at once you created content and then iterated on it?
So it's not a strategy that I've deliberately chosen. It's naturally these are the two topics, so the life philosophy and software development. These are the two things that I mainly think about, and whatever content I write often just reflects the thought process that goes in my mind. So it's a function of whatever I consider to be most significant.
Yeah, no, that's very humble of you to put it that way, but yeah. Atir, I'll ask you the same question. So one of the more unique things about your writing is that you find some way to connect everything to product management, whether that's the Marvel movies or whether that's just your everyday trip to a superstore. And I just want to understand that again, is that a mechanism to make the content more accessible, or is it just like so for example, it's just a way that allows you to write better and just a better way of storytelling?
I think of it as a conversation with a friend, right? So like when I talk to anyone that's in my life, that's how I talk. Like I would try to try to make it a very linear narrative, and that's how I think even in product management, I try to basically simplify and reduce it to a problem or a situation that I'm more easy to relate to, or I feel that I can basically access easily. And that's what I've just generally thought of whenever I'm doing even like a kickoff meeting in a product management ritual, or when I'm talking to developers, etc. I try to analogize a lot of these situations that, oh, just think of this way or that way, or think of it as a person who's entering a taxi, or think of it as a person who's going to the grocery store, or oh, if you've seen this Marvel movie, then this is exactly the same situation, because that's something that they can relate to. So it's not a like a deliberate tactic to gain more traction. I think generally pop culture, that's something that I'm usually into, and generally is situations in my life. If I just sort of describe them and then somehow link them with a product management concept, it just makes it more digestible. Not for the audience, but as we all basically mentioned, we write for ourselves. It's actually digestible for us first, and then as a byproduct, it becomes easily digestible for everybody else. So more than a tactic, it's just how we express ourselves. That's just how we think. And for me, like my individuality is linked with analogies. I try to analogize every single thing, and for me, like anything that happens, like as simple as somebody throwing out the garbage, for some reason I know that that links to this product management concept. I just see, when you when you have a hammer, everything looks like a nail. That's the kind of thing that I have in product management, when it because you're surrounded with those thoughts all the time. So I think it's just an expression of how I would converse with a friend, and that just comes out in my writing as well.
Yeah. So Sean, I'll pass the buck to you next. But on top of the same question, I just want to also basically understand that. So what Arthur talked about was that it rather being a strategy to kind of appeal to a larger audience, it's more also a medium to be able to better write his own thoughts.
Okay.
In an age where everyone basically has a blog or a newsletter or a podcast or a YouTube channel, and you do have a YouTube channel, and you do create content in other mediums as well. I want to understand that how do you create relevant, meaningful content, right? Because it just almost every single time feels that it's becoming harder and harder to be able to discern the signal from the noise, right? Because there's just too much of it.
Yeah. So very interesting question, Abdul. So I think for me, I have been a very big fan of Jerry Seinfeld all my life, right? And one of the things that I've duly learned from him, like the best show that I've ever watched in my life is Seinfeld by far, is the entire attitude of observational comedy, right? And observational comedy is comedy that you find in daily musings, somebody talking to somebody else. How do they think about things, right? And I think at a very deeper level, it is more about finding out the seeds in your life and the weeds in your life. So every daily basis, what I keep doing is just trying to pluck out what seeds I want to sow. And those seeds are that, like, humor is one of the way to sow a seed of basically getting smiles across to people, and also specifically spreading compassion, gratitude, and that all of those things. And how do I remove off certain weeds in my life? Because whenever I'm having a conversation with someone, right, and if I just liven or lighten the conversation in a very, very fundamental way, somebody can speak their heart. They can just pour out their heart and just tell me that this is the problem, Shavan bhai. Yeah, ye mere ko yahan pe help chahiye. This is where I need help, right? And a lot of times, the inspiration for content comes from a lot of people I want to talk about. Like, a lot of people reach out to me, ki Shavan bhai, the last video that we actually saw was about technology for PMs. Can you do a video on growth? Because that is very important to मेरी company में ये हो रहा है. And the whole and sole reason at a very deeper level is because they can relate, they find it accessible, they find it easy to talk to me, right? And that is where the whole concept of the seeds and weeds concept that I put across. You need to grow more seeds in your life, and you have to pull out more weeds from your life, right? Once you sow more seeds, you grow this attitude of compassion, gratitude, benevolence, all of those things, and that makes you typically a better human in life. And once you start looking at those things, you will find a lot of things that really impact other people, and that happens by choice, because people come to you, they speak to you, they find you relatable, they find that this is the kind of person I want to be, right? Not that I'm saying that I'm any good, I'm trying to improve every day, right? The other part is that it also takes account those elements of ego, the things that you don't want to really want to be part of your life, like where you always feel that it takes you away from humanity in general, right? So I try to keep those things at the center of my life, and humor is just a layer on top of it, right? Which makes it kind of accessible for everyone, right? And once that happens, I think most of the ideas flow from conversations that I have with people, right? Someday I'll have a conversation with Atir bhai, and I realize that, oh, there's something that Atir bhai has spoken, and that's really cool. Why don't I just share out something on top of it, right? Because other people can benefit from it, right? Even I would benefit from it, right? So I think that's the whole concept where I kind of think of content creation. I think it's more than it helping kind of structure other people. It's also a way to for myself to improve as an individual, right? It's a very, very strong way of improving the thought process that I have about life, right? In general, it's a reflection of the conversations that I have with people. Yeah.
No, incredible. And I've kind of had the privilege to be able to engage with you on certain one-on-one conversations, so I can certainly sort of provide evidence for that. I also just one sort of thought on that, on the point that you just made. Does it kind of also then end up binding you in some way? That, for example, every single time that because you've used humor as a way to be able to then recreate content, does it give you some leeway to be able to explore other mediums, or like not just other mediums, but to be able to talk about your content in an alternative format, right? Where maybe you start with maybe essays or other long form readings. and where you don't use humor. And I know that you have specifically that the content that you put out has a variety of it, right? Where one part of it is about also helping other people get, their dream jobs in product, and some part of it is about, for example, some of your more serious posts are about, not that the humorous ones aren't serious, but for example, that's much more layered, right? But some of your more direct or serious posts are about, for example, first principle thinking, right, amongst other things, and problem solving. So does that so just wanted to know that, was that because there's a certain expectation? Does that also limit the way that you're creating content?
Not really. I think I have never thought about it. So I think humor comes naturally to me. So that's why by design 80% of my posts come like that. It's not like that I think about it that out of the 10 posts, 8 I will do on humor and then 2 I will do on this. It's not like that.
Yeah.
Sometimes what it happens is that there's something that really intrigues me, and I'm by design a very curious person. I like to read more and more. And once I read a lot of concepts, it's something that's always there in my head, and I would want to say that yes, people need to know this. It's so fundamentally cool by its own virality of the thought that I'm kind of, so like the very same way I was just reading about the other day about the rate of change of technology in comparison to rate of change of human consciousness, right? And I was trying to read something about it, and I just felt that that's super cool, and I wanted to write something about it. And I'm thinking of an article in my head, maybe 2 days back. I have still not articulated it across, and I want to write something on it. So I think most of the inspiration comes from, I honestly think about is that what deserves what kind of attention, and that segmentation is kind of very clear. It's a natural segmentation that happens in the head. Like if something deserves, and also the fact is it's kind of, if you look at reflectively, when I write a serious post, people actually give it a read because they realize that most of the times he's just talking about humor. Now he's talking about something that is actually serious. So कुछ तो अच्छा ही होगा, तो कुछ तो अच्छा ही लिखा होगा इसमें. So that what happens across. Yeah.
I've told you this before. I've been subject to a lot of even in the internal company channel, we have this channel on Slack that's called memes, where a lot of the memes about product managers just are basically a copy paste of your post on LinkedIn, and they're very much targeted towards us PMs. So yeah, Hassan, I'll just basically ask the same question to you and understand that what has been your process in specifically, for example, penning down your thoughts, right? And the content that you take out. Is it for, like, I've individually and personally spoken to Arthur about this, and I'd ask him about it as well. But is it a way that, for example, that you decide the cadence of the information that's going to go out is going to be, let's say, weekly or bi-weekly, or is it just something that's a lot more spontaneous, right? When it happens, it can happen 7 days in a week, and if it doesn't happen, it doesn't happen for months or weeks to go on. So yeah.
For me, I don't decide on a specific cadence in a sense that I don't feel like I have to post because I have to post every week or whatever. I try to throttle my posts. So I try to control the pace at which I spam people, right? So I don't want to post very frequently, but the pace of the frequency of my posts is a function of how many thoughts are going in my head, how many things I am thinking about. So sometimes there have been times that I was posting like every 10 hours. There were times that I was posting every day. I slowed down to once a week, and that's basically not because and when it comes at a regular frequency, it may seem like I am making an effort to put out a post at that particular frequency. It's just that if I realize that I just did a post a few days ago, I might just write it down and put it in my Google Keep, and whenever the next interval comes, then I post it. And sometimes I don't have anything to post, and I just skip that interval.
Yeah, no, makes a lot of sense. And I was just wondering that, even for the audience, that when you did talk about your post being a function of your inward thoughts, I just thought that's not going to be very hard for anyone to guess here who's a software engineer and who's working as a PM. Arthur, I'll ask you the same question. Because your cadence is a lot more predictable in the sense that we know that every single day the post by Arthur Abdurrauf is going to come at this day, time of the day and this time of the week.
Yeah.
So just want to understand that.
Yeah, it's 9:39 a.m. Pakistan time. That's my time that I usually publish. Even when, so I basically use I used to use Buffer before, but now I use a new tool that's called Post Strips. So this is sort of like a shameless plug for them as well. But yeah, like my cadence as of 2019 has been one post a day. And I haven't respected it all the time, but that's what I just try to do. And that keeps me honest as well, because what I do like every day is just take out maybe half an hour to write a post. It's become increasingly difficult because I'm, before LinkedIn only allowed 1,300 characters. Now it allows 3,000. And I like writing long form. And unfortunately, even those 3,000 are less for me. So, like वो ये है ना कि इंसान कभी भी किसी हालत में खुश नहीं है. So, like I have to write. Now that I'm writing longer posts, obviously it's becoming much more challenging to keep up with that single post a day. But yeah, from a cadence perspective, it is pretty much that. And I try to respect it as much as I can. Obviously, there are some ambitious projects in the pipeline. Sometimes I'm trying to create PDFs and ebooks as well. They take longer, but then I sort of create that as a parallel track while I'm working on it. So yeah, that's the problem. Otherwise, the ideation process, like if you're talking about the process in general, it's basically just ideating whenever I come across an interesting story, a blog, an incident that I've happened. And whenever I do get a inspiration, I try to log it very quickly. So I use Notion in that case, very quickly, just put it somewhere, and it can be just a few phrases or a sentence, and I know that I'll remember it. And then I pretty much do it just like a Jira board. So there's like in the backlog, doing this week, and then done. So I sort of like move those posts across. So whenever I have to sit down and write, it's not that I'm just sitting blank. I have like at any point about 60 to 70 topics that I've listed there. And then whatever I'm feeling like that, okay, today I'm going to talk about that, I just pick on that and expand it. And then publish it on Postscript, schedule it for 9:39 a.m. Pakistan time. And yeah.
Yeah, no,
From
no,
there.
your content has a lot of resonance with the entire Pakistan and in large the South Asian community. But you do bring up an interesting point, right? That at any point in time you have, let's say, 60 to 70 thoughts that could further be elaborated upon in the form of a post. But does that also is that has that become an expectation of sorts, in the sense that are there, right, just generally how, for example, writers have these writers blocks and these creative blocks, but when they end up kind of becoming a lot more relevant and popular, then there's this expectation of churning out content. And that's the topic that I wanted to also kind of touch upon, is that when you do when you do amass a certain kind of gathering, a certain kind of following on LinkedIn, does that also mean that you are internally almost always thinking about the fact that there needs to be, for example, Hassan touched upon this, right, that there used to be a time where he used to write almost every 10 hours or every other day, but now it's mostly event driven, and there's no such specific cadence to it, and he talks about it only when he wants to do so. But we just wanted to understand that, has the thought has have you ever been fatigued by this entire process? And if so, do you think that moving forward that would you be adopting an alternative strategy, or what happens in that moment when you are fatigued? Do you have, like, let's say, backlog of content that is basically something that you can start to post, and then wait for a few days or weeks where that entire thought process that led to this content being pent down first comes back again?
Yeah, I think there's no pressure from the community as such. They don't really expect, or they don't post or send me a direct message that, oh, you didn't post today or anything. It's primarily myself that I try to hold myself accountable, that I want to post every single day, because when it comes to content creation, consistency is key. Like that is you it's okay to post a substandard post sometimes, but being consistent is much more important. So I try to keep that habit, and good habits should be preserved as much as they can. As far as the fatigue is concerned, look, I try to write things that will first, make me happy, and then, like, will really satisfy me internally, and allow me to have that cathartic experience. And that's what motivates me, because that's how I think about writing, that, hey, this is going to be a fun post. I don't think of it as a chore. I think of it, oh, this is my fun time. I can have my own little playtime with words, and really combine these thoughts together. So it comes more of as a like, you're looking forward to dinner, and this is, I'm looking forward to my post time, which keeps me going. So it's less about fatigue. But yeah, if I do get into that writer's block, like, my fallback strategy is a repurposing of a blast from the past. Pick up some post from really far back, put it back in, maybe do a little spin on it, and also even mention that this is from before. I know that in content marketing circles, repurposing is a big thing, but I somehow feel it's a bit dishonest if I keep on regurgitating the same content, because I think that I'm not that shallow that I don't have novelty to offer to people, and I will create new content. I don't always want to fall back to my content at the back, but at the same time, I do realize that LinkedIn unfortunately doesn't have the best search experience when it comes to posts, right? So you can't really go back a year back, and then people even have asked me that, can you like tell me, like, all the posts that you've done, is there a ebook or a blog that I can access? And I'd say that you would probably have to just keep on clicking on my feed about 1,500 times before you get to that post, so I might as well write it again. But yeah, just in a nutshell, fatigue is not necessarily a problem, but if I do get to a writer's block, I'll repurpose a post and share it. But yeah, that's how
I wish I had your discipline. I probably would be having or hosting more podcasts that way. But Kevin, so like, there is this, for example, like, we've now come to an expectation that there is going to be at least 2 to 3 posts from Shravan Tikku every single day, right? And so, and I know I've talked to you about this several times. I really don't know how you get the time in the day, or do you not sleep, or are you in, some kind of drugs, that if you are, then please do share that. because because the entire, for example, like,
and Shravan, please do let me know the name of that drug as well, in case you are.
The name of the drug is passion, Atul bhai. Passion. That's the name of the drug. Yeah. But anyways, yeah.
So
Amazon mein milti hai.
Basically, yeah. So just want to know that how do you develop that kind of consistency and that kind of discipline, and then also, more importantly, are there days where you're like, "Aaj nahi karna post." Like, today is like, I'm like, these few days I just want to be left alone. So understanding that process.
See, I think for me, it's a very interesting concept that I believe in. There is this 4 burners theory that I kind of have in my mind, right? There are 4 burners in life. One is career, second is friends, then there is family, and the fourth is health, right? So these are kind of the 4 burners, and the effective fuel for everything is common, right? So what I effectively do is that it's more like if you have a stove in the kitchen, right? And if you consistently use one burner, eventually over time it's going to kind of break apart or fall back or whatever. So you have to be consistent in all 4 angles. So for me, generally, if I want to kind of take a break, so what I do kind of precede my work, right? I effectively write, like, pata hai ki the next 2 weeks I'm not going to work out, so I will plan it across in such a way that I create content for the next 2 weeks, and I just have to pick it from somewhere and just put it across over there, and that is something that I do. But it is not something in general I do, because in general it's more like what Atir bhai said, it's a consistent daily process, that when you get new ideas, the point, the intersection or the timestamp when you get a new idea and the time when you purpose it, if there is, the time difference is very less, the impact is far more. That's what I have seen in general, right? You are far more creative, you're in the zone to understand that concept, you are consistently thinking about it. But if you have written something and put it across in some backlog specifically, and then you're purposing it out after 3 weeks, sometimes you lose context, sometimes you don't understand what you were actually thinking at that point of time, it loses that gravity, right? So I think consistency is definitely key. I think the second and most important part, which I kind of also take away from this, is that it always gives me a function that when people speak across, I think the whole and soul consistency comes from the fact that I want to have more conversations. And I have consistently spoken across at a lot of places that whatever I've learned in the last 27 years of my life, more than that I've learned in the last 1 year, because I've had so many conversations with people. So I think with the whole mindset of becoming a better thinker in general, it kind of fuels that. And that is where the passion comes from. That nahi yaar, ye to karenge, it's something that I want to churn out. And if people have a perspective on it and they probably want to get some sense out of it, that keeps on doing. But yes, honestly speaking, there come times then when I feel burnt out. Ki nahi yaar, nahi ho raha hai. Theek hai, today is the point when I want to take a step back. It happens that way. But the whole thing is then there's this balance that I keep across. And there are days you might not notice it because that's the kind of pattern that I put across, but there are days I put only one post. There are days you might have not realized it, but there are days. But I consistently make it a point, nahi yaar, ki this is a method of life. I think of it like, so I'll give you a very simple example. If you go to any of the great actors and if you want to put across, they consistently act, or probably if you go to a bodybuilder, you'll figure out that in the last 10 years, they've never skipped a day. And consistent bodybuilders, I've actually seen them, right? Because it becomes a method of their life, how they structure, how they think about life, right? So for me, writing is a way to improve your thinking process, right? And I consistently want to do that. Like that is something that probably if you talk about Elon Musk, he always figures out that maybe in a day for 15 or 20 minutes, I want to read. And that is consciously, even if he's spending 80 hours, 80-hour weeks or 100-hour weeks specifically, but he essentially ensures that he does a tweet about something that he really thinks about, and that gives me a lot of inspiration that if somebody is doing so magnanimous things across the globe, तो मैं क्या ही कर रहा हूँ यार, मतलब then for me it's like the 1,000th of that. And the blessing side of it is that yes, people benefit from it, and I've been fortunate that whatever little following I've amassed, well, it is really helping people. That's just a byproduct of it. So it really refines my thinking process, and that gives me that self motivation. Nahi yaar, aaj bhi likhna hai, every day, every day, every day. And now I really don't think about it. I think that theek hai yaar, it's a thought that's coming to my head, and I just want to jot it down. Yeah.
That's a very interesting point. I think something like Nawal Ravikant, right? So he also talks about it, that the reason why, for example, it's very hard for people to compete at what I do is because of the fact that every single day I'm not working 7 hours, 7 days a week or 18 hours a day. It's basically, for me, that's play. And as long as that's play, I just find it something that I'm looking forward to do rather than something that I have to do. So yeah, very interesting. Hassan, I know we are now coming to the close of towards the close of this conversation. So I want to ask you like a few things. Basically, one, start with what your advice would be to aspiring content creators. And B, and then in that thought, in that sort of chain of thought only, if you have any resources or if you know, like if there are any specific tools that you personally use. So Arthur mentioned that he uses Notion. But I think I'd personally be more interested in understanding if you follow or if you have a certain a certain list of resources that you sort of go by. And B is, once you started on this, is this the only medium that you're going to pursue? Or is it, for example, something that you're also looking to explore other mediums, right? Whether that's in the form of an audio, maybe in the form of a podcast, or maybe, having your own YouTube channel, or even sort of writing the same stuff that you do on LinkedIn and converting it into a newsletter on Substack.
So I'm least qualified in this group to share any opinion or tips on how to be a good content creator, because as you have already noticed, I'm not very organized, and there is not a lot of strategy or thought into it. Anybody who's starting off, my personal strategy, I can share what works for me, and it may not be the same for other people. For me personally, my day job is already very, let's just say, it requires a lot of mental energy, right? And I don't have the capacity to invest too much into any effort, any side effort besides that. So I try to write only when I have something to share and something that I have learned. If somebody wants to deliberately build a brand or make an effort or be regular or things like that, that would require a lot of extra energy, which I personally don't have. So it really depends on the person's priorities, how much time they have, how much mental energy they have, and how what they're able to accomplish. For me, what works is to not stress too much about it. Be natural. If you learn something, only then speak about it. Uh, don't try to don't try too hard to come up with something. And if you sometimes it's a good idea to not just write straight away. If some thought comes to your mind, just write it down and think about it some more. And if you think it's useful for other people as well, then you go ahead and share it with us. Now frequency of how often a person can manage can vary from person to person. Some people are just really good at writing, and some people like me take a lot of time to come up with something useful, or something at least I think might be useful. So for me, I think just take it easy, and it's very important to spend much more time in reading and learning than writing. So you can, there's a saying, you can only give what you have. So the amount of reading, and whether it's watching videos or whatnot, should be much more than the amount of time spent in writing. So it all depends on person to person. How much you read will affect how much you can write. And as for the alternate medium, I personally am not very good at speaking, so don't expect any audio or YouTube channel or anything like that, besides the fact that they require a lot of effort in editing and whatnot. So it's not an easy thing to do. Writing is for an introvert like me, writing is the best medium. Although it's sometimes LinkedIn, sometimes it's on my blog, sometimes I'm just bothering my own friends on WhatsApp or whatever. So I write in different places, but I don't have a permanent place where even LinkedIn is not a long-term thing. So I hope that answers your question.
And I think you're just being too humble there. But last, just one more thing that I'd like to ask about is that you talked about reading, right? So just sharing some of your best resources. Not just, they don't really have to be something about that. Some of the resources or some of the content creators that you follow to look for or seek inspiration from to create your own content, but just generally, for example, what are some of the best resources that you've come across? What are some of the content creators that you follow for yourself? And if you could also share some of your favorite books, because I think everyone here would love to know too.
All right. So I don't read anything related to producing content or marketing or anything like that. Things that I read are very technical, and generally somebody who's just want to take inspiration on writing content is not going to be useful. These days I'm reading Android internals, so it's not going to be useful for anybody to produce content. I read a lot of faith-related material to learn my own faith and become a better person. So just random books that are not very useful for the vast majority of people.
So not something like Twilight then.
No.
Arthur, so I'll ask. I'd love to know your thoughts on this too.
Sure. So as far as resources are concerned, I don't have a set menu as such. Like I read a lot of Medium blogs on product management. I go on Quora. I go on Reddit as well, and look at the community discussions over there. I read a lot of LinkedIn, for that matter, because there's so many other content creators in our sphere that they're producing an amazing amount of content, and that does give me inspiration. When the weather's nice, I'm trying to be out and go for a walk. Then I turn on a podcast as well. So This is Product Management or Masters of Scale. And those are a couple of podcasts that I listen to, and that gives me a lot of interesting insights as well. Yeah, and I think like even on YouTube, a whole diversity of different videos now. That could be like learning educational videos. It could be, and sometimes like I used to be a fan of stand-up comedy. So like even Zakir Khan. Sometimes even I got a post out of Zakir Khan once that like I'd like to relate that to product management. And then as Hassan mentioned, sometimes faith-related videos as well, and that also gives you a bit more of a philosophical twist to what you believe in, and how that relates to everything else. And I in my posts every now and then I do talk about personalities. So everyone from whether that's a Hollywood star. Recently I posted something on Hazrat Umar bin radiallahu anhu, and basically I see a lot of inspiration in people itself, like personalities who have made it big in this world, and how they've done a great job, and reading a bit of their, I don't go through the whole autobiography, but reading a bit more about them on just generally whether that's Wikipedia or renowned literature, which is sort of well accepted, that actually gives me even more ideas to sort of generate. So that's a mix that I agree with Hassan. It's more like expose yourself to a lot of literature out there, and eventually things will come to you naturally. That's how it works.
Yeah. Shravan, we've also personally talked about this, and you have recommended so many good resources. The last book that you recommend, it's Thinking in Systems. I'm reading that, and it's a brilliant book, right? So I would love for you to share, some of your best resources, and you personally have been talking to a lot of thought leaders and industry leaders, not just in product but just generally in technology and startups, right? So you've also had an exposure to a wider audience, and whether that's PMs or like directors from Silicon Valley, or just fund like VCs in India. um in your So for example, what are some of the best resources you follow? Because I know that you're very crunched for time, so you probably just end up prioritizing the most important ones. And then B, if you also have a recommendation for the audience here, right? Whether that's books, whether that's like Arthur mentioned, that might not necessarily be related to content creation, but just makes you a better thinker. And that's, I think, my takeaway from this entire podcast today, that essentially once you do have it's going to become less of a method of churning out content once you think about it, not as an activity to do, but something that just helps you, whether be it a cathartic process or whether it be a way to be able to write your internalize your thoughts in the form of a certain medium of writing. So yeah.
I think one of the things that I consistently try to do, which I think I completely resonate with Hassan and as well as Atir Bhai, is get exposed to a wide variety of content. I think that is extremely important for someone to effectively understand the different perspectives, how you look at things. So I read from anything from mathematics to religion to poetry to history, what exactly you want, and or product management in general. But I have always been a very profound believer in how do I kind of add this element of science to the element of faith to a certain level, trying to, because see, honestly speaking, the way that I look at the world is that generally we are all delved into emotions. All of our actions come from a certain kind of an internalized emotion, that when you're feeling happy, right, if you even sweep the floor, you'll feel really happy. But even if you are unhappy, even if you have the best food in front of you, you will not feel like eating it, right? So I think it comes from fundamental emotions, and I've tried to just understand that what is the dissection of those emotions, that how do you effectively make someone happy, right? So besides reading, so I'm an avid reader of faith. Like I have the one of the books that I genuinely suggest for everyone to read is the Bhagavad Gita. It is one of the best books that I have read, at least if you don't understand it from a point of faith, but from the point of understanding of human principles. It is a very, very amazing book, and one of the books that has been very pivotal and very fundamental to the kind of person that I've tried to become. That's one. Simultaneously, then if you really want to read really, really nice books, there is a very nice book which explains how the universe is shaped by mathematical principles. There's this book called The Prime Obsession. That's one of my favorite books that I've read. So it's by John Derbyshire. It's about how the distribution of prime numbers has actually changed human philosophy and built certain systems in time. Then like one of them is the Riemann hypothesis and how it ties to certain different fundamentals. And I think in a more generic level, I have always been a fan of psychology. So, and there is this very interesting book that I generally recommend people. There is this book, The Man Who Mistook His Wife for a Hat. The Man Who Mistook His Wife for a Hat. And it's a very great, amazing satire on philosophy, and then it's an amazing satire on human psychology. So that is something that and besides that, I think Atir Bhai has spoken about a very interesting blog, Masters of Scale. I myself listen to it a lot. And then there is this another book if you would want to read, because I always feel that whenever I give out recommendations, I will always shell out probably 5% of what I want to speak about, because there are so many. I cannot just stress on the effect of compounding. I think effect of compounding is very natural to how to become a better human in life, right? If you improve 1% every day, probably in the next 1 year, you'll improve 37x. So I'm a very, very, very strong believer in the effect of compounding. So you naturally have to make reading a part of your life. Like what Hassan said is completely true, right? That if you don't read enough, if you don't internalize enough, you'll never be able to add that value, right? It's like a bucket. तुम पानी निकालते जा रहे हो लेकिन भरना भी तो है पानी, तभी तभी तो तुम पानी और दोगे. That's how things work out, right? So going across, I think the three books that I have been a fan of comparative religion, been fortunate to even read the Quran to a certain while, and I've been following certain people. So I think comparative religion is one way where I generally feel that you understand human psychology a lot, how people generally think about things, how does faith get built, how do you move from blind faith to true faith, that how you effectively try to understand how we bridge that gap through experiential learning, and it improves yourself as a thinker. That I've always believed that one of the names of Allah is the most compassionate, right? And from there, if you try to put across one of the learning, that if you try to have compassion in your life, right, it would definitely add value to people's life. And that's exactly what I've done in the last 15 months of my journey. I've tried to be like, can I be a little more compassionate? Can I be a little more kind, just to have that effect? So that learning came from religion. Generally, that came from religion. Simultaneously, a very different aspect that I would also say, that you should definitely be a reader of technology, the rate of pace of growth of technology. And that is extremely important, because it helps you understand that how you transcribe to human consciousness. What are the next steps that you would take that would add a lot of value in people's life? And Thinking in Systems is one of the book that effectively talks about how do you build scalable systems. So that is something. And the third part that I would definitely want you to read as one aspect that I genuinely very reserve very close to my heart is art. Read more about art, read more about creativity, read more about poetry, right? I've been a very big fan of Ahmed Farah Saab all my life, right? And one of the ways that I've always thought about is the depth of his words, the very little words that he writes about, and the kind of depth that he poses across. That's something that I want to learn as an individual. With little words, can I make a larger impact? So yeah, that's generally my process.
My key takeaway from this is that the next podcast should be more about the bigger philosophical questions in life, because who wants to know about content when you have such brilliant speakers talking about a lot, much more important topics. I'm going to close the conversation on this. I think we've already gone much significantly over time than what we had dedicated for this, but let me just stop it, and thank you so much everyone for joining in.